Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session for Energy and the EU. I'm your moderator, Pavel Molchanov. I'm from Raymond James. And we have three distinguished panelists for this EU conversation. So from the left, from the far left, Jean Froehley from the German Embassy in Washington.
We're delegates is the right.
That's right. Then Francesco Graziani from the European Union delegation, and Abdullahi Hashi from the Consulate of the Netherlands. We will have time for questions at the end, if any of you would like to ask anything. But to start, what I would like to do is ask the same question to all three of our participants. Russia's war in Ukraine is now at the 3-year mark. The European energy sector has been irrevocably changed. What have you learned, and what has your country's government learned over the last 3 years? Whoever wants to start.
So,
I'll take the responsibility then. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. First time in North Carolina, and I had the opportunity yesterday to have a bit of a look around, and it looks like a beautiful landscape, so it's not going to be my last one. Your question actually goes directly into the core of our, let's say, energy transition as such in Europe, but also like at the core of how we are repivoting our geopolitical stance against like all possible odds coming towards Europe. The last 3 years, so I joined the delegation of the European Union in DC a year ago, more or less, but in the last 3 years, so before joining that, I was at the center of the European response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because I was assistant to the Director General of Energy in the European Commission, and I can tell you that really the scale of the change that invasion created in the way we use energy, the way we invest in energy, the way we see energy, has completely changed our perspective of energy. So our energy policy was basically mostly geared towards like the supply side and increasing our production from indigenous sources, so mostly renewables. That hasn't changed, but what really became at the core of our policy response to the energy crisis that ensued, like the invasion of Ukraine, was really like to have like a strong investment in security of supply and diversifying away from Russian fuels. Just a few numbers, because I'm a bit of a geek number, number geek, but it's important to understand a bit the challenge that we had in front of us. In 2021, so the year before Russian invasion, Europe was dependent for 45%, around 45%, even a bit more, of Russian gas. So within our gas system, we had 45% of molecules coming from Russia. Okay, now we are around 13%, and this happened in 3 years, while it took more than 20 years to go from around 20% to 45%. So we have to put things in perspective here. The 27 member states, through their heads of states and governments, agreed on phasing out Russian fuels. So the Commission had almost immediately after the invasion, like a very strong mandate from the member states to devise a plan to get rid of Russian fuels from our energy system. And we are working towards that. Already, basically, we have now the last mile, which is always like the hardest one. And we're working on having a work plan to phase out Russian gas that will be adopted in the coming weeks. A lot has been done already, mostly through, let's say, a push and acceleration of the production from renewable sources, gas savings. So we passed from around 400 million BCM, so billion cubic meters of gas consumed in 2021. Now we are around 300, so it's already like a considerable decrease in gas consumption. But we can do more, and let's say our recent affordable energy roadmap, action plan that we adopted in February is already going in that direction. So a lot of pieces that are moving towards like diversifying away from Russian gas. And here, of course, US LNG and US, let's say, political support is key for Europe to be able also to have a fast and, let's say, trauma-less, I would say, a transition.
Thank you very much. Of course, as a good German, I have to, and I'm agreeing with everything the European Union is saying. So just to give some perspective from Germany, what happened in 2022 was really a wake-up call, especially for the German energy mix. I mean, what happened at this point is resumed often as what we call in Germany die Zeitenwende, so the historic turning point of foreign but also of energy policy. So what we really can see is at this point the securitization of energy. What does it mean? So before 2022, energy and energy supply was seen as something neutral, which is somehow driven by the market and where it is somehow not very important where it comes from. And this has changed since 22, really bringing forward energy security on the top of the political agenda. So if you had asked somebody 10 years ago about energy security, so this is something where there was really a lack of understanding in Germany because, yeah, I mean, we will do, at this point, there was the understanding, yes, we have good relations with Russia. This has always been the case. Russia has always been a politically, economically reliable supplier, despite political differences. So this was an understanding from the Cold War, when we started at the beginning of the 70s to have this energy relationship with the Soviet Union. There was the understanding that, to the contrary, these economic relations might also foster political change in the Soviet Union, the famous Wandel durch Handel approach, as we call it in German. And this somehow was maintained after the end of the Soviet Union, and especially in the years of Chancellor Merkel. And things really got complicated when there was a decision made in Germany to leave nuclear energy, and which was de facto leading to a huge increase of the dependency on Russian gas. So what we can see now are three challenges for Germany's energy policy: security, competitivity or innovation, and economic growth. And the third one is, of course, net zero. And 10 years ago, maybe there would have been very strong focus on growth or on innovation or competitiveness, or on net zero, of course, but less so on energy security. So this changed completely. So when you follow the current discussions in Germany about the new government, I might come back to that later, you can see that energy security is playing an important role. And this does not mean only, you know, the energy mix, where do you get your primary energy from, but it is also about critical infrastructure, which is a huge issue also related to Russia. So not only the question of where energy is coming from, but also, I mean, how you protect the energy production and also the energy supply is becoming a new topic. So security is all over the place when we talk about energy today.
Thank you, and it's really great to be here in North Carolina. It's for me the second time. From the Dutch perspective, 2022, what happened was not only Russia cut down Nord Stream 1, but also there was internally a political decision to not explore anymore our local gas because of earthquakes, because we had our own local energy production. And there was a long discussion going on in the northern country, in Groningen. That's the area where the gas fields are in the Netherlands. And that time, these two things came together at once, stopping our own production and Russia shutting down Nord Stream 1. As you all know, the Netherlands is a small country. It's the size of Maryland, 18 million habitats. So in a geopolitics, we are very small. So we look at European Union, other partners to make a deal. So we went there. One of the lessons learned from that crisis was not only diversify your source of energy, but also diversify the routing where the energy is coming to you. That was very important so that we also we are sure when it's coming through the port of Rotterdam or another way that we have several ways to get that gas. The second thing we have had that period was, as any other European country, the spike of the energy cost for the household. So how can we subsidize that and what does it mean? Luckily, different to the period of the financial crisis, our government was not cutting spends, but more and more subsidizing the households so that they can survive. But no, not a normal Dutch citizen could pay that much money. Third thing was, as my colleague from European Union said, reduce your use of energy. How can you also reduce it? But also, fourth thing was, how can we accelerate our energy transition? I will come later on that point. So those were actually the three things that majorly were affecting us. Diversifying our source, not only from whom we're getting the energy, that question also is playing a big role at the moment because mostly we're getting the gas from the United States. What does it mean that when we go back to the diversification and also diversifying our routing? Thank you.
Abdullahi, let me stay with you for the nuclear dimension of this. So each country in Europe has its own distinct nuclear policy. And, you know, in fact, Jean, you mentioned Germany. We'll get to that in a minute. But as I understand, Abdullahi, the Netherlands today does not have nuclear power, but you are considering building new reactors. Is that the strategy, and what's kind of the latest on that?
Yes, indeed. That's the third pillar. Accelerate the renewable energy, and nuclear energy is part of that. Solar, wind. Those are the two, but also nuclear energy is a component that also supports that. We have one small reactor in Borsele. It's more a research one, 2022, the government, we have a new government now, but the one before decided that we should build 2 new nuclear facilities. Then we had another election, a new government. They decided also June 2024, instead of 2, to build 4. So currently the plan is to have 4 nuclear facilities in the Netherlands, so that also we can accelerate and have also our own energy production as, to be also kind of sustainable in a certain way. The problem is, and just let me stay on this, I mean, when it comes to the timeline, coming May, we will get the technical evaluation, and there are 2 companies that probably will be building. One is American company, Westinghouse. Another one is probably French one, EDF. So those are the 2 ones that are probably in the game. And but the problem is, you know, to build a nuclear facility, it takes time. It takes a decade. And financing it is difficult. You will not get easy a private sector money to finance such a facility. Rather than security, and the problem is more on how are we going to finance 4 facilities, and where will money coming from? Mostly, as it looks like currently, it will be the government that should finance that, or at least cover it, because the time that you will get money back of it, it's for the private sector currently not so interested.
Jean, let me sort of get your perspective on this. You mentioned Germany 2 years ago shut down its final nuclear reactors. Is there any proposal, perhaps by the new coalition government just elected, to resume nuclear power in Germany?
Thank you. So let me make, please, one point before I answer to your question, which is about supporting my EU colleague on the importance of the transatlantic energy relations and the importance of LNG and oil exports of the US to Europe. I mean, the relationship is very strong. We are mutually the main provider and recipient of gas and oil, concerning the challenges I have mentioned at the beginning, security, economy, and also net zero, I believe that in all 3 fields, LNG from the US is crucial. It is crucial to maintain Europe's energy security. It is crucial in order to bring prices down, especially in Germany, where energy prices are double in the European Union compared, for instance, to France. And is also crucial in order to fulfill the net zero goals, which especially the current and also the future government is trying to follow and to fulfill until 2045. So now, concerning the future energy mix and the future energy policy of the German government, as talks are ongoing as we speak, it is for me very difficult to predict whether this will include a certain openness to nuclear. So my understanding would be that there will be no coming back to the old plants already shut down. There might be an openness towards maybe fourth generation or SMR, at least from the CDU side. But as talks are ongoing, I cannot give a definite answer here. What is the indication I have is that it will rather not be the case. But there might be 1 or 2 sentences in the coalition treaty on some openness towards nuclear. There's a obviously experts and also the industry, they are very much in favor not to exclude this path. From an economic point of view, this would be wise in order also to bring Germany's energy transition in line with the huge challenges German industry now is facing, and also concerning high energy prices in Germany, which has a huge disastrous impact on the situation. But there had been some preliminary talks, also with a published document, and in this document the nuclear path was not mentioned. So there was the mentioning of new gas power plants on one hand. There was a mentioning of enhancing CCS. There was, of course, the mentioning of continuing the hydrogen continuing to set up hydrogen infrastructure in Germany. There was a mentioning of fusion energy, but there was no mentioning of nuclear so far. But I personally don't exclude that this might, however, be still on the table in the talks. But we have different approaches here. CDU had in their program, it was pretty much mentioned that Germany should come back to nuclear at some point. The SPD is rather against, so it is quite likely that that Germany might stick to its path, to leave nuclear for good.
Francesco, one of the questions that's always raised in relation to nuclear is this a green, quote unquote, or sustainable source of energy? Within the EU's European climate law, can you explain what the philosophy around nuclear is?
Yeah, this is actually another of my favorite questions, because it's one of those very difficult questions that at the moment I can reply with a certain kind of safety belt around it. And a few years ago, I would probably have to kind of skip or try to pretend that I didn't understand the question. The reason why I'm saying that is that for many years, the nuclear question was the nuclear bomb question in European politics, in the sense that there's always been like a big divide in terms of like member states, of those very pro-nuclear and those very against nuclear. And the European Union, the treaties regulating the European Union give a complete freedom to member states to decide their own energy policies, to define their own energy mixes, okay? So in a sense, the European Union institutions have always been, if I may say, agnostic about like the nuclear issue. But then, the more we committed to go green and to go towards net zero in 2050, the more the nuclear, let's say, issue became part of the solutions rather than the problems. Meaning that not only politics change in Brussels in a way that a lot of member states that were first like strongly against nuclear kind of tilted towards being first neutral, and some of them being positive towards nuclear. Here I mentioned like the Netherlands, Italy, my own country, and a few others whereby even public opinions kind of shifted a bit towards nuclear. And clearly, from our in terms of European Commission assessment of what the energy needs of the future will be, nuclear is now a part of the mix and will remain a part of the mix. So in when proposing the climate law back in 2019 and 20, the impact assessment attached to the climate law sees more or less nuclear being at the same levels of today's energy needs from now to 2050. So we have to include, like in this discussion, the fact that some of the nuclear power plants that we already have now will be decommissioned because of they will reach their own like lifespan, and some of the member states, as for example the Netherlands, are already planning big in terms of like development from now to 2050 of new facilities. So we have a bit of a mixed picture in terms of like where nuclear will be. But coming precisely to your question, which I think it's a great question, we are now developing a regulatory framework where what we call in jargon the Low Carbon Delegated Act, whereby under the Renewables Directive, the Commission is empowered to create implementing rules for the Renewables Directive that basically mirror the incentives and the policy favors towards renewables and nuclear, so that, let's say, the low carbon solutions, that is a way to say nuclear solutions, are not, let's say, discriminated against, but are part of the solution in reaching net zero in 2050. So your question was about like probably like how the political landscape and the regulatory landscape and factors in the nuclear part of the mix, and because of all this like of this assessment for the future and the fact that there is new technology coming to the market. So you mentioned SMRs, but for example, SMRs are being more and more taken by several member states as a good response to the nuclear issue, so that, let's say, part of the public opinion against nuclear, the nuclear power in general, can somehow be also like reassured about the fact that you don't have to have a massive nuclear power plant in your vicinity to be able to produce energy from the nuclear power plant, but you can also have a very discrete and small installation that somehow also reassures about like the potential risk of it and the disposal of the nuclear waste. So let's say the perception is changing, and nuclear is and will continue being part of the energy mix in Europe.
Okay, very, very thorough. Appreciate that. Let me turn to the subject of electric mobility. And Francesco, I'll start with the EU perspective. Last year, the EU, I believe for the first time, introduced a tariff, I think 25%, on Chinese electric vehicles. Why did you do that?
Okay, so yeah. Thanks for the question. So it's three Chinese manufacturers with a different tariff. So the highest one is 25, but then there is less as well. And let's say the reason why. So there are two components in your question. There is a more industrial policy base of the question, and there is more of a trade aspect to the question. So usually these tariffs are taken as a countervailing as a sort of countervailing measure to face dumping being let's say used at the supplier side. So Chinese manufacturing has somehow included state subsidies into the production of Chinese EVs, and that of course somehow creates like a disadvantage. It's not a level playing field for Chinese EVs in Europe, and that of course had to be counteracted. The reason why it's also there is also an industrial component is that we see that there is an uptake of like overcapacity in Chinese production that is being dumped into the European market. So we have to counteract that, and this also has, let's say, industrial implication, of course, because Europe is now ramping up production of EV at home, and we have to make sure that this is not a nascent market for us, but it's a market that in a way has to be protected so that it can really be serving our our economy in the future. So let's say we always have to consider that when imposing tariffs, there are also like this elements in the game. Yeah.
Gene, Germany is interesting because you have by far the largest auto industry in Europe, so that's the supply side. But on the demand side, what we saw last year is German EV sales actually declined, I think for the first time ever. Maybe just talk about both of those perspectives.
Yeah, I'm in the US for 8 months now, and if you see how many people drive EV cars here in the US and how the network, the network of chargers and superchargers is available and has developed, this is really something you're not seeing in Germany in the same way. And I believe that one of the problem of Germany is that it is part of the general infrastructural challenges we face in Germany, that people have the impression that there is not enough of chargers and that they don't have the same degree as mobility, especially beyond the big cities, than with engine-driven, fuel-driven cars. So I think this is a problem we have to tackle in Germany. Also, there is kind of there's a paradoxon in Germany that in big cities people tend to have lesser and lesser cars anyway. And there where people really need cars at the countryside, there is a feeling that you don't have enough chargers. So I think it is really a demand-driven problem here, and we should focus here more on the consumer. Overall needs, especially in Germany. That it's not enough just to subsidize, the purchase of a car, but it is equally important to have a good network and that people really have the impression they can drive everywhere with these cars. And this is, I think, an additional point to the overall industrial challenge we can see, and also in relation to China.
And Abdullahi, in the Netherlands, the latest statistics show that half of car sales are electric, which is twice the European average, or 5 times higher than it is in the US, for some perspective. Why has the Netherlands been so successful in stimulating demand for EVs?
I think there are several things. One of the things which is very important for EVs is the range. The Netherlands is a small country. For 250 kilometers, you are from one end to the other end. So being that small, it's practical. So you can have a EV car. Second thing, which is also very important, is the purchase subsidy, not only for new ones but also for used ones. So government was from really last 5 years or more subsidizing the purchase of the EVs. Even also, all the government-owned cars are more and more getting towards EV cars. Whenever they replace official cars, whenever they replace public transportation cars, it's always EV. So that's also the push that you're getting. On the other hand, yes, it's up, but there are also challenges coming in. What you see is that cost of operation of an EV car costs more than a fossil-operated car, almost 9 cents, 10 cents extra per kilometer. And that's also another thing which is happening is also that the purchase subsidy that were given to the owners is also being cut down the coming 2 to 3 or 4 years. So this year 25%, next year 75% cut, and 2027 will be no subsidies anymore. So yes, we are doing well currently compared to the others because of those practical things, but more and more we're moving to phasing out that subsidies, and it will be also becoming also a challenge.
The other aspect of transportation that is even more difficult to improve sustainability is the airline industry. And Francesco, I'll start with you for the EU perspective. Can you explain how the EU is regulating emissions from aviation, and in that context, mandating sustainable aviation fuel and anything with electric aircraft as well?
Sure. Well, first of all, here we really go into the main differences that somehow acute observers attribute to the regulatory environment in the EU and the regulatory environment in the US. It's the typical sector where we have so-called mandates to use sustainable aviation fuels under our Refuel EU, Aviation EU regulation, and which is part of the Fit for 55 package, leading to 55% reduction by 2030. So what we have there, very briefly, is like an increasing quota of the fuels used to fuel like aviation jets. It starts actually this year, but having 2% of SAF in total, going to 6% in 2030, and then up to 70% of SAF out of the whole refueling needs by 2050. So we have there like mandates, so which is basically a nice way to say that we impose an obligation on the industry. But what this observers always like, or in many cases fail to mention, is the fact that there are also accompanying incentives to that. So the US system is usually seen as a system that gives a lot of carrots, while the EU system gives a lot of sticks. In this case, there are also carrots, meaning that member states are not only allowed, but also incentivizing giving subsidies for the production, for the creation and then support of thriving markets for SAF. And here, I think it's a very good question, yours also in the sense of like the transatlantic perspective, because we have to consider that all the market that already exists for SAF and that will exist in the future, will develop in the future, growing substantially if we want to hit our targets, a lot of it will come ultimately from production of fuels here in the US. And by having, let's say, a big push against SAF from federal government here in the US might mean that a lot of jobs for US farmers actually are at risk, because Europe will never be able to produce all that the amount of SAF that is needed from now to 2050 to get to 70%. So we were counting on actually importing a lot from the US. So I hope that this is also like resonating in Washington DC circles, because I mean it's something that we have to look at when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about fuels, sustainable fuels. It's markets that are already there, that need certainty, policy certainty, and political support, and that ultimately will benefit both sides of the Atlantic. So we have to consider that.
And Jean, if we theoretically, ask Lufthansa, let's say, why are you not using more SAF? The airline would say, because it's not available, it does not exist. So where is the roadmap for Germany to source its biofuel from?
I mean, concerning the airline industry, I would see this also in the context of the larger transatlantic economic space and of our transatlantic relations. I believe that we should not forget that the airlines are very much also depending on transatlantic investment and trade. So they are pretty much affected also by the current uncertainty, like also other companies in the supply chain industry. So this is, I believe, an additional burden we can see currently for the airlines, especially in the current economic climate. Now, concerning fuel, I mean, I can just reiterate what I've said before, that I believe it is a transatlantic huge opportunity. I believe that the priorities, the energy priorities of the current government are, from a pure European interest, are an opportunity also for us to increase our energy transition goals, and I would say this is also very much valid for the question you asked.
Yep. Abdullahi, do you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. When it's come to the aeronautic and aerospace and also airline policies, we really align with European policy.
Can I add one point? Sorry.
Sure.
I forgot to mention one thing that then came to my mind. It's very important to stress the fact that when we talk to European airlines, they're all now, after an initial kind of like a question mark around like the whole regulatory environment for SAF, they're now more and more enthusiastic about it, because it's also a way to innovate, and also it's a way to push on efficiencies in the system, the way they use fuels, the way they source fuels, and so on. And the very relevant thing is that not only our commissioner, Hustra, is very passionate about the issue, but when talking to American airlines, even if there is no such a federal mirroring provision than the EU fuel aviation regulation, American airlines are voluntarily having very similar standards than European airlines are mandated to have. So the US private sector is somehow also very ambitious in that, and there's no sign that they are backtracking on it. So that's a very interesting, let's say, part of the equation. I think that we shouldn't forget when talking about this.
Let's open it up to questions from the audience. Anybody? Yep, right up front.
Can you just hear me like this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, fellow European from Finland. My question is our biggest trading partner for the EU, the US, is now using language where you can't say climate or requisition, etc. Have you seen any signs within the EU of eliminating certain words or starting to lead away from the green transition or sustainable jobs? Thanks.
I go for it. I'll give it a try first. For those that in the back might not have heard the question is, has the EU shown sign of like backstepping on their climate ambition? Okay. No. The answer, the short answer is no. The more elaborate answer is, the EU right now represents more or less 6% of global emissions. So the EU has already decoupled fundamentally economic growth and emissions. But this creates an opportunity, but also is a risk in terms of our regulatory, the so-called Brussels effect when we regulate something, because whatever we regulate like 6% of it, not anymore 25%, right? So we have to consider that as part of the answer. Second point is, the president of the European Commission was very clear in the fact that we stand our way. We will have to actually accelerate the energy transition, but that doesn't have to be detrimental to our competitiveness in Europe. And let's say the first 5 years of her mandate were really a big push about like the energy transition. If I can use a German term, I would say Energiewende. But now we cannot be naive. We are in a world where we have to, let's say, more and more rely on ourselves from many standpoints, and one of them being like our energetic independence, or at least like our diversification of energy sources. And we have to consider in that we are not a geographically endowed territory in terms of like hydrocarbons. So for us, sun and wind are American oil and gas. We have to bank on what we have already. And this doesn't mean that we have to, let's say, to have our industry suffer high energy prices. Therefore, we have to look at all possible ways to make the energy transition also an affordable energy transition and a competitive energy. So that's why when talking about terminology, yes, it's true, we more and more hear about competitiveness, security of supply, we hear about affordable energy, we hear about clean industrial deals. What this is about? It's not about like stepping back on our ambition in terms of climate action, but it's about putting climate action in the context of a changing world, whereby we don't want to deindustrialize Europe, quite the opposite. We want to keep our industry, we want to make our industry successful. And let's say this, in order to do this, we have to we cannot be naive. And we've been a bit naive lately, but you know, we learned our lesson, and our president was very clear on that. And the clean industrial deal goes in that direction.
Abdullahi, Jean, anything to add on that?
Yes, concerning Germany, we are not giving up our net zero goals. To the contrary, I mean, we have the special situation that the incoming government, together with the old parliament, just voted for constitutional change and for constitutional changes in Germany concerning budget, concerning debt. But within these constitutional changes, there were also authorized spending of 100 billion euro in order to assure climate neutrality until 2045. So this is again a confirmation one more time that Germany will continue that path after a decision by the Constitutional Court in 2021. So this is a kind of a reaffirmation. It is, I mean, it is written within the spending provision, the financial spending provision, but nevertheless, it is considered as a very clear political statement that we will continue. But what I would expect from the incoming government, as I told at the beginning, that we will have a more rebalanced approach among these three priorities: energy security, net zero goal, and first and outmost economic growth, competitiveness, affordable energy prices. There's an urgent need here in Germany, and my expectation is that the incoming government will prioritize here within these three pillars.
I mean, from the Dutch perspective, sustainability is the word. You cannot change that wherever or whenever you are. It's also very important to look at, as also mentioned it, how circular our economy is going to be. And if you go also far and look at our transatlantic relationship, it's a relationship that's not only political, it's also heritage. You know, how many Dutch people, Americans have also Dutch background. I'm based in Atlanta for Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and Alabama, and Tennessee. So, well, Washington is very, very, very far away from me. and that's the approach that we have.
Any other questions? Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
Whether well, first of all, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Whether the implications that relying on American LNG have, given that it's quite expensive, right? If you compare it to pipeline gas, and it is extracted through fracking. But I think this LNG there to stay forever. It's just something that is for this critical situation.
From that perspective, it's a part of the energy mix. And as I said earlier, it's part of our strategy to have several sources and several routes, so where energy is coming in. So you don't only go for the cheapest. You have to have strategically, in the umbrella of security in energy, several sources and several routes. And that's also why we also import LNG from the States.
Fully agree with your point. Consider it a bit as an insurance policy against, like, let's say, a political turmoil that that came from the East, and that taught us that maybe putting all the eggs in a basket is not like the best strategy. And you also have to consider that LNG from the US is somehow considered more expensive, also because a lot of LNG has been sold through spot markets. So for those who don't know, like, there are like short-term markets. So basically markets where you buy almost for the day after your purchase. But we are now incentivizing more and more long-term contracts, so that there is not only visibility on how much of the US LNG will reach Europe, but also, like, it's a very good instrument. Having long-term contracts is a very good way also, like, to lowering costs for the supply. It's actually really a fraction of that price, and ensuring, let's say, visibility for European off-takers on how much they will be able to count on for the coming years. From the European perspective, from the regulatory perspective, there is no regulatory issue under European law until 2050 to have, like, long-term contracts. So until the end of 2049, there is no problem. So when assessing the climate law and what kind of regulatory path would ensure that in 2050 we would be net zero, gas, you're saying, is it going to be there forever to stay? The answer is yes and no. So we already see, like, a decreasing, as I was saying before, a demand for gas, but we also see that in 2050 there will be enough technology to have us still have a presence of LNG or gas in general in our energy mix, but accompanied with technologies that will be able to abate those remaining emissions in the economy. So my answer to you is yes, until 2050 we see a use for US LNG, and yes, we also see a decreasing relevance of gas within the entire energy system, but not decreasing to zero.
Okay. We'll wrap up with three quick questions, quick answers for you individually. Jean, first to you. Germany today gets 25% of electricity from coal. The law is to eliminate that by 2030. Is that going to happen?
Well, I'm optimistic that for electricity this is going to happen. For the overall energy mix, I'm not sure, but concerning pure electricity, we are on a good way. We have over 50% already renewables in the electricity mix. We have to see, of course, that the German energy supply is embedded into the EU energy, the European energy market. So it's very difficult to say for any country you have so and so many electricity because we have so and so the energy mix. It's more difficult to have a pure assessment on the energy mix, but I'm confident that on electricity we might continue. but we have also to these the challenges of the energy demand of the future when we talk about data centers and so on. And I really hope that in our planning, we have to integrate the new demand side here. And this might, I hope, also lead to some adjustments.
Abdullahi, in the Netherlands, there was specifically at the court in The Hague, there was a high-profile climate case involving Shell, where some citizens sued the oil company over causing climate change. Do you expect more lawsuits such as this to happen under Dutch law?
Yes and no. Yes, because I mean, citizens, there is a clear division of, judicial, politics, and execution authorities in the Netherlands. So, yes, we expect that it would happen. And it's also, probably you would know, because of our intensive agriculture industry, there are also problems in our environmental allowance to build homes. So that will definitely go on. But it's also looking at the checks and balances. What are the companies like Shell doing in decarbonizing that industry?
Okay. And Francesco, last question for you. In 2026, the EU begins enforcement of the so-called carbon border adjustment. Can you just briefly explain what that is? Mm-hmm. And for our audience, how do you think that will affect the trade negotiations with Washington?
Yes, the trickiest question is always at the end. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism is the way the EU is basically balancing off like the carbon pricing that is asking from our own industry. Meaning, we have a system that is called ETS, emission trading scheme, whereby for the last 15 to 20 years, we've been asking our industry to decarbonize fast so that, let's say, we put a price on carbon, and the industries in several sectors covering around 75% of our emissions from the industrial sector, they have to, let's say, decarbonize. And those that do it faster than certain targets have also, let's say, a stream of revenues by selling the relevant carbon certificates, okay? So when implementing the system, we knew that the system could, on the one hand, let's say, push technology advancement and push a European industry to be decarbonized, but on the other hand, could incentivize some industry to relocate right across the border from the European Union, still sell into the European Union their products, and therefore having the so-called carbon leakage. Okay, so we needed to have a mirroring system that, let's say, increases this carbon pricing also for products being imported into the EU, that would make the push to decarbonize European industry not like an incentive to leave, to deindustrialize Europe. So this is the concept around it. Of course, that means that, in our view, it's a climate measure because it's simply mirroring what's happening already in the EU. So we're not saying we don't do anything in the EU, but we impose a duty from things coming into the EU. So we're saying we're doing our homeworks, but whomever wants to sell into the EU have to do also the same homework. That's to avoid carbon leakage. Clearly, this now is being perceived outside the EU as a sort of like carbon tax. Okay, so if I want to export into the EU, my importers will have to pay a certain duty, which would make my products somehow less competitive. What we're saying is that no, we have a provision within our CBAM, the cross-border adjustment mechanism system, that provides for the possibility for the exporters to show that they did their homeworks wherever they're producing their products. So let's say there is this possibility to show that. It's very tricky on a pragmatic standpoint because it's somehow red tape, it's paperwork to show how they measure they produce those products abroad by cutting emissions. But we are having like a very good uptake in terms. Right now, there's just a transition phase, okay, until 26, for which already for the last couple of years, exporters had to prove how they decarbonize their production. So this is going actually surprisingly well. We are seeing like a lot of uptakes, a lot of the dialogue between the European Commission and exporters and importers. So we are confident that the system will work. But of course, I cannot prejudge how much of the high-level political discussion will be touching upon this, because clearly now we live in a world where apparently tariffs are again like a magic solution to all economic problems of countries. So we cannot exclude that this will be part of a more high-level discussion, but this is for the future to see.
Very good. So, Jean, Francesco, Abdullahi, thank you for a great discussion. Super. Thank you.